Good evening, all, and welcome back to Dark Fears. Tonight, we travel into the frozen heart and forgotten corners of the Maine wilderness, a land of endless forests, isolated backcountry trails, and places where help does not reach, uncovering 7 of the most disturbing and terrifying wilderness horror stories ever reported. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to Dark Fears for daily horror content that will keep you up at night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. Now, let us step into the shadows of the Maine wilderness, where civilization ends and terror begins. My name is Ethan Caldwell, and this happened when I was 32 during a solo winter trek through Maine's North Woods, something I'd trained years for and believed I could handle. I wasn't chasing thrills. I was running from noise, from people, from a life that felt too loud. The wilderness felt honest, quiet, predictable. I entered the forest near a forgotten logging road just before dusk, planning a 3-night hike to clear my head. No cell service, no nearby towns, just me, my pack, and miles of snow-swallowed trees. The ranger station logbook warned about sudden storms and disorientation, but nothing about danger. Nothing about leaving. The first night was calm. Too calm. Snow muffled everything, and the woods felt like a cathedral holding its breath. That's when I heard it for the first time. A single, low whistle. Not wind, not an animal. It came from somewhere between the pines, measured, deliberate, like someone testing if I was listening. I told myself it was nothing. That was my first mistake. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time the wind shifted, my brain tried to turn it back into that whistle. By morning, I convinced myself fear had filled in the gaps logic didn't want to face. I packed up early and pushed deeper into the forest, following an old trail barely visible beneath the snow. Around midday, I noticed something wrong with the silence. Birds were gone. Even the usual creak of trees settling in the cold had stopped. It felt like the forest was listening now, not me. That's when the whistling returned, closer this time. It echoed once, then again, repeating the same simple tune. 3 notes, always 3. When I stopped walking, it stopped too. When I moved, it followed. I shouted, half angry, half hopeful, expecting a hunter or another hiker to answer. No response. Just the slow crunch of my own boots and that distant sound pacing me. Never rushing, never fading. By late afternoon, I realized something terrifying. The whistling wasn't coming from one direction anymore. It was moving. By the 3rd day, my map meant nothing. The landmarks didn't line up anymore, and trails that should have crossed simply didn't exist. I wasn't panicking yet, but something deeper had started to rot in my chest. The kind of fear that doesn't scream, the kind that whispers logic away. The whistling began before sunrise. It was closer than ever, close enough that I could hear breath between the notes. I froze inside my tent, listening as the sound circled me slowly, patiently, like it had all the time in the world. Snow crunched softly outside, deliberate steps never quite reaching the fabric wall. I remembered something my grandfather once told me about the Maine woods. He said if the forest starts copying human sounds, you leave immediately. You don't answer. You don't look. The whistle changed then. It wasn't just 3 notes anymore. It was trying to hum. And it was getting better. I broke camp in a rush, hands shaking so badly I dropped my compass twice. I didn't care about direction anymore. I just needed distance. From the sound, from the thing learning my patterns. Every step felt watched. Every pause felt dangerous. By midday, exhaustion slowed me. And that's when I noticed the footprints. They weren't mine. They followed alongside my trails, never crossing it, never stepping where I stepped. Long strides. Too long. Bare impressions pressed deep into the snow, like whatever made them was heavier than it should have been. I told myself it was an elk, a moose, anything but what my gut knew. The whistling came again, right behind me. This time it stopped suddenly, and a voice replaced it. My voice. It said my name. Perfectly. Calmly. And just close enough that I felt breath warm the back of my neck. I ran. I didn't stop until my lungs burned and my vision blurred, and even then, I could hear it behind me, laughing softly through the trees. I don't remember deciding to hide, only realizing I already was. I'd wedged myself beneath a fallen spruce, branches sagging low enough to block the wind, and hopefully, whatever was following me. My chest hurt from breathing too loudly. I pressed my glove into my mouth and waited. Minutes passed. Then hours. The forest shifted around me, shadows stretching as daylight bled away. Just when I thought I might have lost it, the whistling returned, right where I'd come from. Slow, curious, almost playful. I could hear footsteps now, crunching snow with no urgency, like it knew I wasn't going anywhere. Then it stopped directly in front of my hiding place. I stared at a pair of legs through the branches. Too thin, bent wrong at the knees. They didn't move, they didn't sway with breath. They just stood there, as if waiting for me to confirm I was still alive. Then it crouched. Branches snapped inches from my face as something leaned closer, and a whisper slid through the needles, soft and pleased. Found you. I don't know how long I stayed frozen after that. My body felt hollow, like fear had scooped everything else out. When the pressure lifted and the branches stopped shaking, I waited longer. Long enough that my muscles cramped and my fingers went numb. When I finally crawled out, the forest looked rearranged. Trees I remembered weren't there anymore. Paths bent the wrong way. Even the stars above seemed unfamiliar. That's when I realized it wasn't just following me. It was guiding me. The whistling resumed, distant now, pulling me forward like a trail marker. Every instinct screamed not to follow, but every other direction felt heavier, wrong, like walking into deep water. I followed it until I saw lights through the trees, warm, yellow, human. A cabin. Salvation. As I stumbled closer, the whistling stopped. Behind me, something exhaled in disappointment. And in the cabin window, I saw movement. Someone already standing there, waiting for me to knock. I knocked anyway. I don't know why. Maybe exhaustion drowned out reason, or maybe whatever had guided me there knew I'd choose warmth over caution. The door opened almost immediately, as if my arrival had been expected. A man stood there, late 50s maybe, beard thick and gray, eyes too alert for someone living this far out. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He never asked my name, never asked where I came from. He just stepped aside and said, "You heard it too, didn't you?" Inside, the cabin smelled of old wood and something sour beneath it. Maps covered the walls, hand-drawn, overlapping, obsessive. Everyone circled the same area. My area. The man poured me tea with shaking hands and told me he'd lived here 11 years after it followed him home from a hunt. "It learns," he whispered. "Your voice. Your hope." The whistling started outside again. The man's face collapsed into panic. "It doesn't like sharing," he said. "You shouldn't have come here." Glass from every direction. The man backed away from the door, muttering prayers under his breath. I stood frozen, watching my reflection warp in the glass. Then the whistling changed. It blended two voices, mine and the man's, layered together, Imperfect, but close enough to make my stomach turn. The thing outside was practicing, preparing. The cabin door rattled once, then again. The man screamed for me to hide, to get under the floorboards where he'd survived before. But I saw it then. Scratches in the wood beneath the table. Deep and repeated. Survival wasn't escape. It was delay. The door burst inward with a sound like splitting bone. I don't remember leaving. I remember snow in my mouth, and branches tearing at my face, and the whistling chasing me. Not fast, never fast. It didn't need to hurry. When I woke up days later in a hospital, they said I was found miles from any trail. Still whistling. Recovery didn't end the nightmare. The doctors said hypothermia explained the confusion, the panic, the sounds I kept making in my sleep. They didn't understand why I refused silence. I needed noise, TVs, radios, people talking, anything to drown out the memory of those 3 notes. Weeks later, back home, I noticed small things changing. My dog stopped sleeping in my room. Birds vanished from my yard. And sometimes, when the house was quiet enough, I'd hear it. Not outside, inside my walls. The whistling always started faint, like air slipping through a crack. I tested myself, humming different tunes aloud, trying to prove it was stress. But the sound that answered me didn't copy my melody. It corrected it. One night, half asleep, I heard my own voice whisper from the hallway, calling my name exactly the way I had in the woods. Hopeful, lost, I didn't answer. I lay still, counting breaths, realizing with sick clarity that it hadn't followed me out. I had brought it with me. I'm recording this now because it's learning faster than I expected. It doesn't whistle as much anymore. It doesn't need to. It's figured out how to breathe like me, how to pause between words the way I do. Sometimes, when I speak aloud, I hear myself echo a half-second late, just slightly off. I've stopped hiking, stopped going anywhere quiet. But it doesn't matter. The Maine woods didn't let me go. They just changed where they existed. Last night, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror, smiling when I wasn't. The sound came from behind my teeth, soft and pleased. 3 notes. Perfect. If you're listening to this and you've heard whistling where it shouldn't be, don't follow it. Don't answer it. And whatever you do, don't let it learn your voice. Because once it does, it won't chase you anymore. It will wait. My name is Rachel Morgan, and this happened when I was 27, during what was supposed to be a quiet research trip into Maine's remote lake region. I'm a graduate student in environmental science. My goal was simple: document water quality changes in isolated wilderness lakes untouched by tourism. No ghost stories, no thrill-seeking, just data. The lake didn't have a name on any modern map. Locals at the last gas station called it the Old Water and warned me not to camp near it. They didn't explain why. They just asked how long I planned to stay, then nodded like they already knew the answer. I reached the lake by late afternoon. It was perfectly still. No ripples, no insects skating the surface. The water was black, not murky, just empty. Like it absorbed light instead of reflecting it. Even the sky above it seemed dimmer. I set up camp anyway. That night, as the sun disappeared, I noticed something unsettling. The lake never reflected the stars. It was like the sky refused to look at itself. I tried to rationalize it. Tannin-rich water can be dark. Still water doesn't ripple much without wind. Science has explanations for most things, until it doesn't. I recorded notes, took samples, and avoided looking directly at the lake longer than necessary. Something about it made my head ache. like pressure behind the eyes. Around midnight, I woke to a sound that didn't belong outdoors. Breathing, slow, deep, too steady to be an animal. It wasn't coming from the trees. It was coming from the lake itself. I sat up, heart hammering, watching the surface finally move, not outward, but inward, like the water was sinking. Then I saw them, shapes just beneath the surface, darker than the water itself, drifting slowly toward the shore. They weren't swimming, they were standing. One shape lifted its head above the surface, and for a split second, the lake reflected something. Not the stars. My own face, eyes open, mouth breathing in time with the sound, staring back at me from the water. That's when I understood. The lake wasn't empty. It was watching. I didn't sleep again that night. I sat with my back against a tree, eyes fixed on the lake, counting seconds between breaths that didn't belong to me. By morning, the surface was still again, flat and innocent, like nothing had happened. That scared me more than the movement. I took water samples as planned, though my hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the vials. The readings didn't make sense. Oxygen levels were wrong, temperature was wrong. Depth readings kept changing, even though I stood in the same spot. It was like the lake didn't agree on how deep it wanted to be. While scanning the shoreline, I found footprints in the mud, bare, human-shaped. They came out of the water and stopped just short of my tent. No return tracks. I followed them with my eyes, heart pounding, until they vanished into dry ground like they'd been erased. That's when I noticed something worse. The footprints matched my shoe size exactly. And the longer I stared at them, the more they looked fresh. By noon, I decided to leave. Data wasn't worth whatever this place was doing to my head. I packed fast, refusing to look at the lake again. But as I lifted my backpack, something tugged at it, just enough to make me stumble. I turned. The lake had moved closer. I don't mean the shoreline shifted naturally. I mean the waterline had crept forward, swallowing my footprints, my tent marks, erasing proof I'd ever been there. It advanced in slow, deliberate pulses, like breathing. Then the surface broke. A hand emerged, pale, waterlogged, fingers too long. Another followed, then shoulders. They didn't climb out. They unfolded upward, standing from impossible depth. Their faces were smooth, featureless, except for eyes that reflected light wrong, like mirrors angled inward. They didn't chase me. They watched as I ran, and I swear the lake sighed as I reached the tree line, disappointed, like it had almost remembered me. I didn't stop until the forest swallowed the water from sight. And even then, I could feel something wet following behind my thoughts. I reached my car just before dusk, lungs burning, clothes soaked with sweat and lake water I didn't remember touching. I locked the doors and sat there shaking, staring at the tree line like it might open up and spill black water onto the road. It didn't. The forest stayed still, watching me leave. I drove for hours before I found a motel. I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the sensation of sinking, of pressure folding inward around my chest. In the bathroom mirror, my skin looked pale and bloated, like I'd been submerged too long. I scrubbed my hands until they burned, convinced they smelled like stagnant water. That night, I heard dripping, not from the ceiling, from inside the room. A wet sound followed me wherever I moved, soft and patient. When I turned on the lamp, the carpet near the bed was damp, darkening slowly, spreading in a shape that looked disturbingly familiar. A shoreline. I packed my things without checking out and left before sunrise, telling myself it was stress, exhaustion, dehydration. anything but what my instincts whispered. The lake had marked me. Weeks passed. I returned to campus. I told my advisor I'd encountered unsafe conditions and submitted partial data. No one questioned it. But my dreams didn't stop. Water crept through every one of them. Hallways flooding, lecture halls filling to the ceiling while everyone else kept talking like nothing was wrong. Then the reflections started failing. Bathroom mirrors showed me half a second late. Windows reflected a version of me that didn't blink when I did. Once, brushing my teeth, I saw my mouth keep moving after I stopped, breathing when I wasn't. I went back to my notes, desperate for something concrete, something scientific. The lake's coordinates didn't exist anymore. GPS data pointed to dense forest with no water source nearby. Satellite images showed dry land where the lake should have been, as if it had never been there. But at night, when my apartment is quiet enough, I hear that same slow breathing, deep and steady, coming from my sink drain, waiting. I don't think the lake wanted my body. I think it wanted my place. I finally broke and told someone. Not a friend, someone official. A local historian I found buried in an online forum about forgotten Maine waterways. When I emailed him the coordinates from memory, he replied within minutes. He told me the lake had been closed in the 1950s after a survey team vanished. Not drowned, not missing, just gone. Their camp was found dry, equipment neatly packed, journals ending mid-sentence, all mentioning reflections behaving incorrectly. The final note written by the lead researcher read, "It is not water, it is a surface." The historian warned me never to return, never to acknowledge it, never to let it know I remembered. Places like that, he wrote, don't disappear, they relocate. That night, my phone buzzed with a weather alert from my area. Flood warning, flash flooding. I checked outside. The street was dry. But every reflective surface in my apartment, TV, windows, mirror, showed rippling water where my face should have been. Something was getting closer. I don't use mirrors anymore. I covered them. I don't answer the sink when it breathes. I don't look down at puddles after rain. I've learned how to live without reflections. But it's adapting. Yesterday, during a lecture, I looked at the polished floor and saw myself standing at the front of the room, wet, pale, smiling too wide. When I blinked, it was gone. No one else noticed. No one ever does. I understand now what the lake was doing. It wasn't copying me. It was practicing how to exist where I do, how to stand, how to breathe, how to wait. The old water didn't want to drown me. It wanted to replace me. If I disappear one day and no one remembers where I went, check the places that don't reflect the sky. Check the water that looks too still. And if you ever see yourself looking back from somewhere you shouldn't, don't blink, because that's when it steps through. It's been months since that research trip. I've moved twice, changed jobs, and tried to avoid any large bodies of water. But the whispers follow me. Not voices, not exactly. The water breathes through taps, puddles, and shiny surfaces. It tests me, learning patience, learning boundaries. Each time I glance at a window or mirror, I feel it assessing whether it can step closer. Last night, during a power outage, I swore I heard ripples across my bedroom floor, faint enough to dismiss. But then I felt it, a cold pressure. Liquid crawling under the door, reaching toward me. I fled to the kitchen and poured salt across the threshold. The ripples vanished, but I know it wasn't gone. I've realized that once you encounter it, the lake doesn't forget. It doesn't need your body to return. It only needs your memory, your presence embedded in the world, a place it can occupy while waiting to claim more. I may never return to Maine, but I'll never leave it behind. This morning, I checked the bathroom mirror. I didn't look directly, just a glance. And there it was. A single ripple across the glass, moving upward slowly as though the surface was alive. My reflection was perfect for now, but I knew it wouldn't stay that way. I've stopped speaking aloud unless necessary. I've stopped moving around reflective surfaces when I can avoid it. Every puddle, every glossy countertop, every window. It's a potential doorway. I live in fear of blinking, of turning my head, of looking too long. The lake wasn't just water. It was patience. It was learning. It was waiting. And one day, I know it will step out of the dark and into the world it has been observing, starting with me. I record this as a warning. The lakes in Maine's remote forests aren't just still. They're hungry. They don't drown you. They replace you. And once they know your face, there's no leaving. My name is Liam Harper, and this happened when I was 29 during a weekend getaway with friends deep in the Maine wilderness. We wanted isolation, a rustic cabin far from cell towers, electricity, or anyone else. Adventure, we said. Escape, we said. We never imagined the cabin had other plans. The place wasn't on any GPS. Only a handwritten note from a local guide pointed the way. Don't stay more than 2 nights. We laughed it off. Who follows rules that aren't written in stone? The cabin looked perfect at first. Weathered wood, moss on the roof, smoke curling from a stone chimney, like it had been waiting for us. Inside, it smelled faintly of pine, wood stove smoke, and something else, damp and metallic. A faint pulse seemed to thrum beneath the floorboards, but I chalked it up to nerves. That first night, I couldn't sleep. The cabin itself seemed alive. Walls shifted slightly when I blinked. Floors creaked in patterns that weren't ours. And then I heard it. A long, slow inhale, followed by an exhale that rattled the windows. I tried to convince myself it was just the wind, the old wood settling. My friends were asleep, snoring softly, oblivious. But the breathing continued, soft, steady, moving around the room. Sometimes it sounded behind me, other times beneath the floorboards. Every time I turned, nothing was there. Yet the pressure of it made me freeze. By morning, the sun revealed a small detail I hadn't noticed before. The walls weren't straight. Corners bowed slightly, beams curved unnaturally, and the air itself seemed thicker near the back of the cabin. Every breath I drew felt measured, as if the cabin itself was syncing to my heartbeat. I told myself to ignore it, to focus on packing wood and preparing breakfast. But then I noticed it. The floorboards rising and falling, subtly, like lungs breathing. The cabin wasn't empty. It wasn't just a structure, it was alive. By the second night, sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, the cabin exhaled. A deep, wet sigh that made the floorboards quiver beneath my back. I tried to tell myself it was imagination, but my friends noticed too. One of them whispered, "Liam, do you hear that?" The sound wasn't coming from one corner. It moved, from the floor to the walls, then the ceiling, like the cabin itself was inhaling us in. Doors that were closed in the morning now stood slightly ajar. Windows rattled even though there was no wind. Shadows in the corners seemed to stretch when I looked directly at them, only to snap back when I blinked. Desperate, I tried recording the sounds on my phone. Playback was worse than reality. An unnerving rhythm, like a heartbeat merged with breathing, sometimes faster, sometimes slower, always aware of me. By midnight, I realized it wasn't just alive. It was watching us, studying how we moved, how we reacted, learning before it acted. I wanted to leave, but the door wouldn't budge. The handle twisted like it had its own muscle, and when I pulled, the frame shivered and groaned. My friends were panicking too, banging on the walls and shouting. Nothing worked. The cabin wasn't just alive, it was trapping us. Then the breathing changed. It became closer, sharper, as if something massive had pressed itself against the ceiling above us. The floorboards beneath our feet sank slightly with every exhale, then rose with every inhale, like the entire structure had lungs. I tried to climb onto the furniture, to get higher, thinking maybe distance would protect me. But the cabin shifted again, slightly tilting, like water inside a glass. Every movement we made was measured, mirrored. And then I saw it. A shadow forming in the corner, tall and fluid, stretching from floor to ceiling. The breathing emanated directly from it now, and for the first time, I felt eyes on us. From the wood itself, from the dark, wet corners, from the very air. By the third night, we weren't speaking anymore. Not because we didn't want to, but because the cabin listened. Every whispered word, every nervous laugh, every frantic apology was absorbed into its walls. It responded with creaks and sighs, pulsing with each of our heartbeats. I found myself tracing the warped floorboards with my fingers, trying to understand the rhythm. Inhale, pause, exhale, pause. It was learning us, reading our fear like a book, and I knew it had plans. One of my friends tried smashing a window. The glass didn't shatter. Instead, it rippled like water and reformed. Then a sound came, low and resonant, almost pleased. We backed away. Every step made the cabin groan, as if in warning. The door handle turned by itself, just enough for a crack of light to spill through. But no one could leave. We weren't just trapped. We were inside something alive. The thought hit me hard. The cabin didn't want to kill us. It wanted to become us. I tried reasoning with it. Stupid, I know. I whispered apologies, offered to leave, begged it to let us go. It responded by deepening its rhythm, the walls flexing around us like a cage tightening. Every heartbeat I had was echoed in the floorboards, amplified by a sound that didn't belong to the cabin. It belonged to something older, something patient. I noticed then that the furniture had shifted subtly. Chairs leaned slightly toward us. The bed frame curved, almost smiling. The stove door opened and closed in slow rhythm. Every object obeyed the cabin, moving with the pulse. I realized that if we made a sudden movement, we might provoke it. But if we stayed completely still, it might tire of us. So we froze. Hours passed. The exhaling continued, louder and slower now, like the cabin had discovered our fear and was savoring it. By dawn, we had learned a terrifying truth. We were guests, but not the owners. By the fourth night, desperation had replaced fear. We needed a plan. We decided to move as a group toward the door, synchronized, careful not to trigger any sudden response. The cabin was quiet at first, almost patiently waiting, as if it understood our intent. We reached the threshold. The handle turned slowly under our combined push, and for the briefest moment, the door seemed like it might yield. Then the floor beneath our feet sank slightly, like lungs contracting, and the walls groaned in protest. The air thickened, pressing against our chests as if warning us to stop. A shadow flickered across the doorway, long and twisted. It wasn't human, not entirely. I caught glimpses of warped wood bending unnaturally, almost reaching for us, curling like fingers. Somewhere in the back, a faint exhale echoed through the walls, louder than ever, like the cabin was breathing us in. We froze, caught between motion and terror, realizing that every escape attempt fed its strength. I watched my friends' faces pale as the breathing intensified, almost screaming through the walls. The cabin's structure quivered rhythmically, as if inhaling and exhaling in response to our panic. The corners of the room seemed to move, stretching slightly, bending toward us, like the wood itself was alive and watching, judging. Then the walls pulsed, a deep vibration under our feet. Objects shifted subtly. A chair leaned toward the bed. A cupboard warped as if sighing. The stove emitted a low hiss in perfect rhythm with the pulse. We had no choice but to run. Every step made the floorboards groan in response. Every breath echoed back as a distorted shadow of our panic. Behind us, the cabin seemed to expand, its ceiling stretching higher, its walls curling in, as if the structure itself had grown to trap us. We reached the door. The handle turned slowly, as though inviting us. And for the first time, we felt the illusion of escape. We made it outside, gasping, hearts hammering, lungs burning in the cold night air. The forest seemed calm, silent, like nothing had been waiting there for us. I turned to look back at the cabin. From the outside, it looked like any old wooden structure, quiet and still under the moonlight. No warping, no movement, just a normal cabin. But I knew better. I could feel it watching us, the air heavy with the pulse of its presence. Every inhale it had taken inside seemed to echo faintly in the night, in time with our racing heartbeats. We ran until the tree line swallowed the cabin from view, but the sense of being observed never left. My friends were shaken too, silent, except for quiet sobs and shaky breaths. Even now, weeks later, I can feel the memory of the cabin's pulse in my chest. Every quiet moment reminds me that somewhere out there, it still breathes. Waiting. We never spoke about it again, at least not in detail. The cabin existed in our memories, like a living nightmare, a pulse in the dark we could feel but never see. I avoided Maine wilderness trips entirely. My friends did too. But I know it is still out there. The old wood, the warped walls, the floorboards that inhaled and exhaled. They remember. It watches travelers from the forest's edge, testing, studying, waiting for anyone curious enough to step inside. Sometimes I catch myself pausing in quiet cabins elsewhere, listening for a slow inhale, a faint exhale, a rhythm that shouldn't exist. And I know, with bone-deep certainty, that the cabin is not unique. There are more like it, structures alive, breathing, patient, waiting to replace what they invite in. If you hear a floor creak too perfectly in an empty cabin, listen closely. Don't run. Don't panic. Just breathe. Slowly. Very slowly. It's learning. My name is Ethan Calloway, and this happened when I was 26, hiking alone in Maine's northern forests. I'd spent years chasing solitude, mapping trails, photographing wildlife. That weekend, I thought I'd found the perfect escape. A stretch of dense pine forest, far from any road, cell signal, or human presence. The first day was peaceful. Birds called, wind rustled through the branches, sunlight dappled the mossy ground. I set up camp near a small clearing beside a creek and told myself I'd finally found sanctuary. But by dusk, a strange sensation settled in, like the forest was listening. I first heard it when I was collecting firewood. Soft murmurs, unintelligible words carried on the breeze. I froze. No one should be here. But the whispers continued, weaving through the trees, always just beyond sight. The words weren't loud enough to make sense, yet distinct enough to send shivers down my spine. I told myself it was the wind. I hoped it was the wind. That night, the whispers grew closer. They weren't wind anymore. They had intent. I lay in my tent, heart racing as soft murmurs threaded through the fabric, circling me like invisible hands. Every time I tried to focus, the words dissolved, replaced by faint laughter that felt just out of reach. I unzipped the tent to see the forest in moonlight. The clearing was empty. Nothing moved. But then I noticed a pattern in the shadows. Shapes crouched low to the ground, thin and elongated, retreating whenever I blinked. My rational mind struggled against terror. Animals, trick of the light. But the shapes weren't random. They mimicked me. Each movement I made, each breath, they mirrored silently in the dark. I grabbed my camera, thinking documentation might anchor me to reality. The whispers paused when I pointed the lens at them, as if they knew I could see. The camera captured nothing but darkness. Yet I felt their gaze in every frame, a presence lurking just outside the lens. By the second night, the whispers had evolved. They weren't just words anymore, they were names. Mine, whispered softly in a tone that was both curious and mocking. I tried shouting back, demanding they stop, but my voice vanished into the trees. The forest answered with a low rustle, like a sigh, and the whispers returned, circling closer. I left the tent and walked to the creek, hoping distance would give me safety. The water reflected moonlight perfectly, but in its surface, I saw something impossible. Dozens of faces pressed against an invisible barrier beneath the surface, pale and silent, staring directly at me. When I blinked, they vanished. My rational mind screamed, fish, reflections, hallucination. But instinct told me otherwise. Every shadow, every rustle of pine needles felt alive, aware of me, tracking me, predicting my steps. The forest was no longer neutral. It was conscious, patient, and malevolent. I realized then that this wasn't a prank or wildlife behavior. The woods were hungry for attention. I tried to leave at dawn, packing my gear with trembling hands. But the path I had followed into the woods was gone. Trees that had been spaced evenly now pressed inward, narrowing corridors of trunks and shadows. Every direction led back to the same clearing where I had first heard the whispers. And then the whispers changed. They were laughing, higher, faster, sharper. They seemed to come from every direction, bouncing between trees, yet I couldn't locate a source. Panic clawed at me. I ran blindly, pushing through thick underbrush, tripping over roots, my lungs burning. The forest seemed to shift as I ran, forcing me back toward the creek, toward the clearing, toward the unseen watchers. By midday, exhaustion and fear pinned me against a massive pine. I realized the truth. The forest didn't want me to leave. It wanted me to become part of its whispers, another voice in its endless chorus. By the third night, I had stopped moving voluntarily. Every step I took seemed measured by the forest, every sound amplified, every shadow attentive. I couldn't tell if I was being followed or if the trees themselves were the watchers. The whispers had grown louder, layered, almost forming sentences I couldn't comprehend. I tried screaming, shouting my name over and over, hoping to assert my existence. Instead, the forest repeated it back to me, slower, distorted, with a mocking cadence, as though it was learning me, practicing me, memorizing how my fear sounded. Sleep was impossible. My body ached. When I closed my eyes, the whispers came not from the air, but from inside my skull, echoing in rhythm with my heartbeat. I realized that the forest was no longer outside me. It had found a way inside. By dawn, I stumbled to a familiar tree, the creek in sight, and I realized the cruelest truth. I was lost in a living maze that could feel my fear and adapt to it. By the fourth night, exhaustion had made me reckless. I shouted at the trees, promising I would leave, vowing revenge if they didn't let me go. The forest responded, not with words, but with movement. The ground trembled underfoot, roots shifting subtly, branches bending toward me like skeletal fingers. I tried running, but the path behind me closed instantly, replaced by more trees. The whispers now had faces, flashes of pale shapes peering through foliage, vanishing if I stared directly. I realized it wasn't just echoing sounds. It was showing me visions of what would happen if I stopped resisting, if I let it claim me fully. In desperation, I climbed a fallen log to get a view, hoping to find escape. But the forest stretched infinitely in every direction, a labyrinth designed to confuse and terrify. It wasn't angry. It was patient, waiting for me to succumb, waiting for my spirit to become part of its chorus. The whispers were now all I could hear, and they were laughing. By the fifth night, I had stopped trying to escape. My limbs ached, my mind frayed, and the whispers had learned my name, my fears, my memories. Every sound I made was absorbed, every glance tracked. I understood now. The forest didn't want me gone. It wanted me integrated, a permanent voice in its chorus of whispers. I sat in the creek clearing, shivering, listening. The whispers weren't chaotic anymore. They had patterns, a rhythm. They spoke in half-formed sentences, promises, threats, invitations. Sometimes they repeated my own thoughts back to me, twisted slightly. The faces in the shadows had grown clearer, thin and elongated, features constantly shifting, mouths moving silently. They didn't need to speak. They communicated through presence, pressure, intention. Each glance at them was like staring at mirrors that reflected my worst fears. I realized the forest was not just a location. It was an entity, alive, patient, and infinitely hungry. Desperation led me to one last attempt, speaking to the forest, asking it why, pleading for mercy. The whispers stopped instantly. Silence like thick velvet pressed down on me. I thought briefly that perhaps it was listening, considering. Then the trees began to move, not violently, but subtly, almost imperceptibly. Branches bent toward me, roots shifted closer, creating narrow corridors that guided my steps back to the creek. The faces in the shadows appeared again, close now, just beyond reach, staring, judging, enticing. It wasn't punishment. It was instruction. I realized I was being taught a lesson. Control is an illusion in this place. I had been arrogant, thinking I could conquer or map it. The forest didn't bend. It waited, it adapted, and it consumed in its own time. As the night deepened, I understood. There was no running. The forest would wait. And if I ever left, I would carry its whispers inside me forever. By the sixth night, exhaustion and fear had merged into numbness. I walked slowly, following the creek, listening to the whispers as if they were a heartbeat guiding me. The forest had stopped chasing me. Now it only watched. Every shadow, every subtle shift in the wind was an observer. I understood that it wanted more than fear. It wanted presence, my attention, my compliance. The faces had grown bolder, appearing at the edge of my vision. When I turned, nothing was there, but I could feel their gaze pressing on my back, twisting my thoughts, urging me to listen closer, to obey. Every tree, root, and branch had become an instrument of psychological torment. I realized then that I was no longer entirely alone. Even if I left, part of me would remain here, embedded in the forest. another voice in its chorus of whispers. The forest doesn't just consume the body. It consumes the mind, piece by piece. By dawn, I finally stumbled back onto a recognizable trail, exhausted and trembling. The whispers faded, but they left imprints on my mind. Every quiet moment, every soft wind through the trees carried their echo. I was free of the forest's grasp physically, but mentally, I knew I would never escape. Since that night, I avoid northern Maine forests altogether. I refuse trips into wilderness areas where isolation reigns. Yet the whispers return at night. Faint murmurs threading through my dreams, reminding me that the forest is patient and it remembers. If you ever find yourself alone in dense Maine woods and you hear a voice that echoes your thoughts, don't ignore it. Don't move toward it. Don't think you can outsmart it. The whispering woods is alive. It waits, it watches. And one day, it will call your name, and you may never be able to leave. My name is Caroline Hayes, and this happened when I was 24, during a winter camping trip in northern Maine. I had joined a small group of friends for ice fishing on a remote lake, miles from the nearest road or cabin. The forest surrounding the lake was silent, blanketed in snow, as if the world had paused just for us. At first, it was peaceful. The frozen lake reflected the pale winter sun, snow crunching under our boots, laughter echoing faintly across the ice. But as night fell, the wind changed. It became sharper, heavier, carrying whispers that seemed to originate from beneath the ice. We joked nervously, attributing it to natural sounds amplified by the frozen surface. But the whispers didn't stop. They became more insistent, repeating fragments of our conversations, echoing our fears. And then we saw the first cracks, small fissures forming beneath the ice, moving in patterns that didn't make sense, almost deliberately avoiding us. A sense of watching settled over us, like the lake itself had eyes, and it was hungry for attention. By nightfall, the air had grown frigid, and the whispers became clearer. I could hear my own name being murmured from beneath the ice, stretched and distorted. My friends tried to laugh it off, but their faces betrayed fear. Every sound we made echoed back with a delay, warped in tone, almost as if the lake itself was mimicking us. We set up camp near the shore, huddled around a small fire. But the ice beneath our feet shifted subtly, a soft groan traveling through the frozen surface with each exhale. My flashlight illuminated thin cracks that stretched in geometrical patterns, forming shapes that looked almost intentional. Then we noticed shadows beneath the ice, dark forms sliding slowly beneath the frozen surface, always staying just out of reach. They didn't seem like fish. They didn't seem like animals. And the whispers grew louder whenever we tried to focus on them, urging us to listen, promising something we couldn't understand. For the first time, I realized the lake was alive, patient and waiting. By the second night, the lake's whispers had grown persistent and structured. They were no longer just echoes of our voices. They carried fragments of our thoughts, fears, and secrets. I could hear my own doubts repeated back to me in a hollow, mocking tone. Every footstep on the ice was measured, almost synchronized with the murmurs, as if the lake was reacting to our presence. I decided to test it. I dropped a small rock onto the ice. The sound echoed once, then another crack appeared elsewhere, far from the impact. My friends were silent, staring at the fissures widening slowly beneath us. Shapes slid just under the ice, twisting in impossible ways, avoiding us but watching intently. The whispers turned urgent, layered with laughter. It wasn't trying to scare us. It was communicating. I realized that the ice itself was a medium. The frozen lake a living organism, patient and intelligent, observing how we moved, how we feared, how we reacted. We spent the night huddled together, silent, hearts hammering, fearing the very surface beneath our feet. By the third night, panic had begun to set in. Every crack in the ice was a signal, every whisper a warning. The shadows beneath the ice were no longer passive. They darted toward our reflections, stretching unnaturally, coiling beneath the surface like serpents. I could feel their gaze pressing upward, as if trying to pull us into their frozen world. We debated leaving, but the path back through the forest seemed distorted, unfamiliar. It was as if the lake had extended its influence, warping reality around it. Every attempt to navigate the shoreline led us back to the same spot: the cracks, the shadows, the whispers. That night, I saw something I will never forget. A figure formed entirely of ice beneath the surface. Humanoid but elongated, staring up at us. It raised a hand slowly, and the ice creaked in response, synchronized with our pounding hearts. The lake wasn't just alive. It wanted interaction, and it was testing our fear. By the fourth night, exhaustion and fear had dulled my senses. But the lake refused to relent. The whispers had become personal, calling out our deepest insecurities and mistakes. Every heartbeat I took seemed to echo in the ice, amplified and twisted back at me. The fissures beneath our feet expanded slightly with every move we made, like the lake itself was testing our boundaries. I noticed then that the shadows beneath the ice were no longer random. They moved in patterns, almost deliberate formations, circling our camp, weaving between cracks, always just beyond reach. One of my friends reached down to touch a fissure, and the ice groaned under her fingers, forming concentric cracks around the point of contact, as if the lake was aware of our attempts to control it. We huddled in silence, realizing that any rash action could trigger something far worse. The frozen lake wasn't just a body of ice. It was alive, intelligent, and patient, feeding off our fear, our hesitation, our very presence. By the fifth night, desperation had taken over. We could no longer pretend the lake was just frozen water. The whispers now threatened in tone, repeating our fears faster, sharper, with distorted echoes. Every move we made was mirrored by the ice, small cracks appearing in direct response to our gestures, shifting patterns that seemed to anticipate our actions. I tried to focus on rationality, telling myself that shadows were nothing more than reflections, cracks, natural formations. But the humanoid figures beneath the surface moved intentionally, circling the camp, elongating, twisting unnaturally, never fully revealing themselves, but always present. We realized there was only one choice. We had to leave. But the lake didn't make escape easy. Each attempt to traverse the ice caused tremors beneath our feet, faintly shifting the fissures toward us, like it was testing how far we dared to go. The frozen lake was alive, watching, calculating, waiting. By the sixth night, I had stopped counting the hours. The lake's whispers had become omniscient, repeating thoughts I hadn't spoken aloud for years, dredging up memories I wanted buried. Every movement was measured, every glance monitored. The ice beneath us seemed to pulse faintly, synchronized with our heartbeats, as if it could sense the fear vibrating through our bodies. I noticed that the shadows beneath the cracks had grown taller, thinner, almost human. But their proportions were wrong, limbs bending impossibly, faces stretching in silent screams. When I moved, they mirrored me, twisting in ways no living creature could. The whispers weren't just calling. They were inviting, coaxing, instructing, drawing us closer to the center of the lake, where the ice was darkest. For the first time, I understood. The frozen lake wasn't just a threat. It was alive, an ancient entity that measured, learned, and consumed through fear, patience, and observation. Escape was no longer a matter of distance. It was a test of will. By the seventh night, desperation had become raw panic. The cracks beneath us groaned with every movement, spreading slowly toward our camp. The shadows had stopped hiding. They hovered, bent over the fissures, peering through the ice like predatory eyes, yet never fully crossing the threshold. The whispers now spoke in my voice, repeating my own thoughts back to me in a twisted rhythm. My friends were shaking, muttering apologies to the lake as if it could forgive. I realized that reason was useless here. Any attempt to control the ice, to predict it, made it stronger, more focused on us. In a final, desperate move, we tried moving together toward the shore. Each step triggered cracks that widened under our feet, almost coaxing us toward the center. The lake wanted participation, and every misstep fed its presence. I understood then, with chilling clarity. The frozen lake was patient, intelligent, and inexorably hungry. By the eighth night, our energy was nearly gone. Every step across the ice felt heavier, each breath sharper in the frozen air. The whispers now knew our weaknesses, repeating fears we hadn't even admitted to ourselves. My limbs shook as I tried to stay upright, listening to their soft, insidious laughter beneath the ice. The cracks had widened further, revealing darker shapes below, forms that seemed to stretch and coil, as if testing the ice's strength. When one friend accidentally kicked a fissure, a loud groan echoed across the lake, and the shadows darted toward us in the reflection, then vanished. Panic surged. We realized the lake didn't just observe, it manipulated, guiding us, learning how to exploit our fear. I knew in that moment that this frozen body of water was far older, far more intelligent than we could comprehend. It didn't want to destroy us. It wanted to teach, consume, and imprint itself into our minds. The lake was alive, and it would wait until we surrendered entirely. By the ninth night, we had no choice but to move in unison. Each step deliberate, eyes darting across cracks and shadows. The whispers echoed our own thoughts, sometimes overlapping, sometimes mocking. The ice groaned beneath us, fissures forming with each step, almost as if the lake was guiding us toward its center, toward something we could not see. When we finally reached the edge of the forest beyond the lake, the whispers faded, but the memory remained imprinted in my mind. I could still hear faint echoes in the quiet of my apartment, soft murmurs threading through my dreams. I knew that part of the lake had followed us, lodged itself in my consciousness, patient and waiting. We survived physically, but none of us could escape mentally. I will never return to Maine's northern lakes. And if you ever hear your name whispered from beneath frozen ice, beware. The lake is alive, watching, learning, and waiting for its next visitors. My name is Jacob Miller, and this happened when I was 29 during a solo hiking trip deep in the Maine wilderness. I had heard rumors of an old, abandoned cabin hidden in the forest, far from any road, left untouched for decades. The thought of exploring it alone thrilled me. I loved uncovering history and the eerie stories tied to forgotten places. The cabin appeared as the sun dipped behind the pine-covered hills, its silhouette dark against the fading light. Weathered wood groaned under the weight of years, windows shattered, door hanging loosely on its hinges. The air was thick, smelling of mildew and decay, and a sense of unease settled over me. I stepped inside, flashlight cutting through the darkness. Dust motes danced in the beam. The interior was cluttered with broken furniture, rusted tools, and remnants of a life long gone. Yet, as I explored, I began to hear faint creaks, soft footsteps echoing behind me. But the cabin was empty. Something wasn't right. The deeper I explored, the more the cabin seemed to respond to my presence. Doors creaked open on their own. Floorboards groaned as if someone, or something, had walked just behind me. I told myself it was the wind or the settling of the old wood, but the pattern of the noises suggested intent. I found a staircase leading to a small loft. As I climbed, the air grew colder, heavier. The whispers began, soft, indistinct at first, like murmurs through the walls. They didn't seem human, yet they carried a strange familiarity, as if the cabin remembered those who had once lived here. In the loft, I discovered old photographs, faces staring out with unsettling intensity. Some were scratched out, others had eyes eerily blank or hollowed. A chill ran down my spine as the whispers intensified, forming syllables I couldn't understand, yet somehow seemed directed at me. I realized the cabin was more than abandoned. It was alive with memory, with intent, and with malice. By the second night in the cabin, the atmosphere had grown oppressive. Every sound I made seemed amplified, the creak of floorboards, the whisper of wind through broken windows, even my own breathing. Shadows moved unnaturally along the walls, stretching and shrinking as if alive. I tried to dismiss it as my imagination, but the unease was tangible, pressing against me like a living thing. I discovered a trap door beneath a loose rug in the center of the main room. Hesitant but curious, I opened it and found a narrow stairwell leading downward into darkness. A cold draft rushed past me, carrying the faint smell of rot and something metallic. The whispers intensified, now forming fragments of words, half-sentences I couldn't fully understand, yet unmistakably calling me. I realized then that the cabin didn't just hold memories. It absorbed them, playing back the fears and regrets of anyone who entered. Every step into the basement felt like stepping further into a consciousness older and darker than myself. I descended cautiously into the basement, the wooden stairs groaning beneath my weight. The space was small, cluttered with broken crates and old tools. The air was thick and cold, carrying the unmistakable scent of decay. The whispers now spoke more clearly, though still indistinct, a chorus of murmurs echoing from the walls themselves. In the far corner, I saw it, a large mirror, cracked and blackened with age. My reflection shimmered strangely, not matching my movements exactly, as if it were alive and observing me separately. I froze. The whispers aligned, louder now, almost chanting. I wanted to run, but my legs felt heavy, as if rooted to the floor. Suddenly, a chair moved across the room on its own, scraping along the wooden planks toward me. The mirror reflected not just me, but figures behind me, pale, faceless, pressing closer. The cabin wasn't abandoned. It lived, feeding off fear, learning, and waiting for me to falter. By the third night, I had stopped trusting my own senses. The basement seemed to shift subtly, walls narrowing or stretching depending on where I looked. The whispers were no longer just sounds. They were taunting me, repeating my mistakes, my regrets, in voices I recognized but couldn't place. Every movement I made was mirrored and distorted in the mirror, showing me versions of myself twisted by fear and exhaustion. I tried to leave, climbing back toward the main floor, but the cabin seemed to resist. Doors I had opened easily before were now jammed, hinges creaking as though protesting my escape. Shadows slithered across the walls, elongating and bending unnaturally, always just beyond the reach of my flashlight beam. I realized then that the cabin didn't want to harm me physically. It wanted to consume my mind, to integrate my fears into its own consciousness. Every creak, every whisper, every distorted reflection was part of a design far older than I could comprehend. By the fourth night, exhaustion had dulled my willpower. I realized the cabin was aware of my thoughts, reacting to fear before it was even expressed. Every floorboard groan, every whisper, every flicker of shadow seemed calculated, feeding off my rising panic. I began to speak aloud, reasoning, bargaining with the cabin, pleading for a path out. But the mirror at the end of the hallway reflected not me, but someone, or something, watching me from behind. A chair moved across the room without a sound, stopping just inches from my feet. I jumped back, tripping over debris. The whispers swelled into a chorus, urgent, almost hungry, repeating my name alongside the names of unknown figures, past visitors, victims, or perhaps echoes of the cabin itself. I understood then that this place was alive in a way no human could survive mentally. The cabin learned, it anticipated, and it waited. Patiently, deliberately, until it could claim your mind as its own. By the fifth night, I could feel the cabin watching me constantly. Every corner, every shadow seemed alive, twisting subtly when I wasn't looking directly at it. The whispers had become intelligible now, speaking in phrases that made my skin crawl. Reminders of regrets, lost loved ones, and misdeeds I thought forgotten. I could no longer distinguish reality from reflection. The mirror in the basement had become central. I noticed figures behind me, barely visible, elongated, faceless, yet mimicking my every move with sinister precision. The air grew colder, as if the cabin exhaled deliberately. A living entity surrounding me, pressing on my senses. Each creak of a floorboard, each groan from the walls was measured, intentional, and meant to heighten terror. I realized then that the cabin didn't need to kill. It fed on my fear, extracting every ounce of courage and hope, until only panic remained. Any attempt to resist seemed futile, as if I was trapped in the cabin's consciousness. By the sixth night, desperation had replaced curiosity entirely. The cabin was no longer passive. It interacted with me. Doors I tried to open slammed shut behind me. A floorboard would collapse slightly under my weight, seemingly to steer me into certain areas. The whispers now repeated phrases I had thought only I knew, commenting on my thoughts and movements with chilling awareness. I attempted to flee through the main door, only to find the hallway stretched unnaturally, distorted as if the cabin itself was reshaping reality. The mirror in the basement glowed faintly, reflecting not just shadows, but entire scenes of previous visitors, screaming silently in frozen terror. I realized that I was part of its history now, a new layer in its living memory. The cabin didn't need to speak. It could communicate through fear, reflection, and distortion. Every second inside confirmed that this place wasn't just abandoned. It was alive, patient, and insatiably aware. By the seventh night, I had almost stopped noticing time. The cabin's influence had seeped into my mind, twisting perceptions and magnifying fear. Every corner I passed seemed to stretch or shrink subtly, shadows moving in impossible ways, reflecting fears I didn't even know I had. The whispers now spoke in commands and riddles, forcing me to acknowledge secrets I had long hidden, dragging them into the open like they were part of the cabin itself. The mirror in the basement became a window into a darker world. I could see figures frozen in silent terror, their faces pale and hollow, trapped in the cabin's memory. It wasn't just observing. I felt it probing, measuring my reactions, testing how much fear I could endure. I realized then that leaving was not just a matter of walking out the door. The cabin had to release me, willingly or unwillingly. Every step, every breath, every heartbeat was under its control. And I was painfully aware of just how alive this abandoned place truly was. By the 8th night, I finally managed to escape. Or so I thought. The main door opened, but the forest beyond seemed different, distorted, twisted. The whispers had faded, replaced by a heavy silence that pressed down like a physical weight. I ran through the trees without looking back. Yet I could feel the cabin's presence lingering, like an invisible hand brushing against my mind. Back home, I found that the memories of the cabin did not fade. I could still hear faint whispers when the house was silent, see glimpses of faceless figures and reflections, and feel that same cold presence watching from corners of rooms. I understood that the cabin didn't just exist in the woods, it existed in me now. Part of me would always belong to it, a permanent record in the consciousness of something ancient, aware, and hungry. I warn anyone who finds an abandoned cabin in the Maine wilderness. Curiosity is a dangerous thing here. The cabin is alive, and it will remember you forever. My name is Ethan Carter, and this happened during a late summer hiking trip in northern Maine. I had been planning a solo trek through a trail deep in the forest, one that locals rarely spoke of and always warned travelers to avoid. The path was overgrown, flanked by towering pines whose dense canopies blocked most of the sunlight, leaving the ground in perpetual twilight. I set up camp near a small clearing as dusk fell, the air thick with the scent of pine and wet earth. Birds were silent, unnervingly so, and even the wind seemed hesitant. As night descended, I noticed faint footprints around my tent, too large and too deep to be my own. I shrugged it off, thinking an animal had wandered near. By midnight, I began hearing something unusual. Whispers that drifted through the trees, soft and melodic at first, then forming words I couldn't understand. The forest felt alive, watching, listening, and waiting for something. By the second night, the forest had grown unsettlingly quiet. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig seemed deliberate, as though something followed my movements with patient intent. I tried to rationalize it as animals or wind, but the footprints had multiplied, forming paths that circled my camp and vanished into the shadows. I ventured cautiously down the trail to investigate. The deeper I went, the more the forest seemed to twist unnaturally. Trees leaned at impossible angles, roots forming patterns that resembled faces screaming silently, and shadows stretched and recoiled at the edges of my vision. The whispers grew clearer, forming phrases in a distorted, guttural tone, as if the forest itself was communicating with me, warning me, or testing me. When I returned to my tent, I found the footprints fresh and closer than before, now surrounding the campsite. It was no longer a random encounter. The forest was alive, aware, and patient, studying me, learning how far fear could drive me. By the third night, I could feel the forest pressing in on me, the trees no longer passive sentinels, but watchful sentries. Every shadow seemed to move independently, stretching along the ground, merging with others, forming shapes that mimicked human forms but were grotesquely elongated. The whispers had grown louder, chanting in distorted syllables, sometimes even mimicking my own voice, repeating my doubts and fears aloud. I tried to focus on the trail, hoping it would lead me out. But the path twisted unnaturally, looping back on itself. It was as if the forest had rearranged itself, a living maze designed to disorient me. Each step made the ground beneath my boots feel softer, almost like the forest was absorbing my presence, watching how I reacted to fear. I realized then that this was no ordinary wilderness. It wasn't just trees and dirt. It was an ancient consciousness, patient, intelligent, and unnervingly aware of every move, every breath I took. By the fourth night, exhaustion was setting in, and the forest seemed to sense my weakness. Every step I took caused leaves to crunch unnaturally, echoing loudly as though alerting something unseen to my presence. The whispers now carried threats and suggestions, urging me to venture further into the maze, teasing me with glimpses of movement just beyond my flashlight beam. I stumbled across a small, forgotten creek, its water black and still, reflecting distorted trees above. In the reflection, I thought I saw figures, thin, faceless humanoids, standing silently on the opposite bank, mirroring my movements. When I looked directly, they vanished, leaving only the whispers behind, laughing, mocking, reminding me that the forest was alive, feeding off fear and hesitation. Panic surged. I realized the forest didn't just observe. It manipulated, bending reality, twisting perception, and ensuring that no one left unchanged. It wanted something from me, though I didn't yet know what. By the fifth night, I realized that sleep was no longer safe. Each time I closed my eyes, the whispers followed me into dreams, weaving impossible shapes from branches, shadows, and faint glimpses of figures I couldn't identify. When I woke, the footprints around my tent had multiplied, circling closer, now impossibly deep and elongated, leaving me no sense of safety. I tried to retrace the trail during the day, but the forest refused to cooperate. The path seemed to vanish and reappear at random, streams changing course slightly, trees leaning differently than the day before. Every step felt calculated, as though the forest anticipated my actions and shifted around me, forcing me to confront my fear repeatedly. By evening, I discovered a small clearing with an old broken sign, "Turn back." The words seemed carved not by humans, but by something with intent, warning me, taunting me. I realized the forest didn't want to scare me. It wanted to teach, trap, and consume. By the sixth night, panic had taken hold. The whispers were no longer just audible. They felt physical, pressing against my skull, threading into my thoughts, predicting my fears before I spoke them. I attempted to flee along the trail, but the forest had grown alive with traps. Low-hanging branches that seemed to reach for me, roots tangling my feet, shadows that split and moved independently to block my way. I stumbled into a shallow ravine and froze. Across it, I saw the figures, tall, thin, faceless humanoids watching silently. They didn't move like humans, more like reflections, yet fully aware of my presence. I understood then that the forest didn't need to attack. It could control through fear, making every misstep part of its game. I ran blindly, guided by instinct rather than sight. Every heartbeat echoed through the trees, every rustle magnified. The forest was watching, waiting, and learning, and I had become its unwilling student. By the seventh night, I was on the edge of complete exhaustion. My mind raced constantly, trying to make sense of the forest's unnatural patterns. Every step felt deliberate, as though the earth itself had a mind and was guiding me toward some unknown fate. The whispers no longer spoke in words alone. They now mocked my desperation, echoing fragments of sentences I had never spoken aloud. I came across an old, collapsed campsite. Torn tents, scattered cooking gear, and broken backpacks littered the ground, signs of travelers who had vanished before me. The forest had claimed them, and their energy seemed trapped, feeding the life of the woods. I shivered as shadows moved along the trees, almost flickering like spirits. I realized that the forest's hunger wasn't for flesh. It was for fear, memory, and attention. Each night, it tested me, measured me, and sought to absorb my awareness entirely. The trail I'd followed was no longer just a path. It was a conduit, alive and deliberate. By the 8th night, panic had fully consumed me. I could no longer distinguish reality from illusion. The whispers had begun repeating my own name, sometimes in my own voice, sometimes in a deeper, distorted tone. Every shadow seemed sentient, moving independently, always staying just beyond the edge of my flashlight beam. I stumbled upon a clearing that seemed oddly unnatural. Trees arched in impossible angles, forming shapes that resembled faces, screaming silently, frozen in the wood itself. I could feel the forest observing me, learning, shaping the space around me to maximize fear. When I turned, I saw the faceless figures again, standing in the distance, tall and thin, reflecting my movements in perfect synchronization. I understood that escape would not be simple. The forest didn't just surround me, it controlled the experience, warping space, perception, and thought, forcing me to confront my deepest fears. Every sound, every rustle, every whisper was a deliberate psychological trap designed to test my endurance. By the 10th night, I had lost all sense of time or space. The forest surrounded me completely, and I felt its awareness in every step, every breath. The whispers had fused into a single, agonizing presence, repeating my regrets, my fears, my memories back to me. The faceless figures were everywhere, mirrored in reflections of water, distorted shadows, and even the bark of the trees. Finally, I stumbled onto an old logging road and ran without pause, desperate to leave. When I finally emerged at the edge of the forest at dawn, I thought I was free, but the feeling of being watched didn't leave. At home, I still hear whispers in quiet moments, shadows stretching unnaturally across rooms, and sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I see faceless figures standing silently, waiting. The forest didn't let me go. It never would. It didn't need to. My fear, my memory, my awareness had become part of it, forever woven into its living darkness. By the 9th night, I was teetering on the edge of hysteria. My footsteps became hesitant, each snap of a twig echoing like a gunshot through the silent forest. The whispers were now a constant presence in my mind, repeating fears I had never voiced aloud. The faceless figures appeared more frequently, moving closer, always just at the edge of my vision, disappearing when I tried to confront them. The trail had become almost impossible to follow. Every direction seemed wrong, the forest rearranging itself subtly but deliberately, ensuring I never felt safe. I found remnants of previous travelers, scraps of clothing, broken gear, and shallow graves partially hidden beneath the roots. The forest didn't kill. It claimed awareness, absorbing fear and memory into its own consciousness. I understood then that this place was sentient, patient, and malevolent. The forest had no interest in my body. It wanted my mind, my memory, my very sense of self, slowly eroding them until I was nothing more than a whisper in the trees. The forests of Maine, the abandoned cabins, and the hidden trails are more than just landscapes. They are living witnesses to fear, curiosity, and human vulnerability. Each story we explored tonight is a testament to what can happen when the unknown reaches out and refuses to let go. From the sinister whispers in the dense woods to faceless figures lurking just beyond the edge of sight, these are not mere legends. They are real encounters, documented by those who dare to step where few would tread. As you reflect on these 7 tales, remember that fear is not always external. Sometimes it follows you home, hidden in shadows, in reflections, and in moments of silence. The Maine wilderness is vast, patient, and unforgiving, always watching, always waiting for the next traveler to step too far into its darkness. Thank you for watching and for joining us in the shadows tonight. This was Dark Fears,